10-4. He said, follow me. He cut his blue lights on, went in front of the car. The LTD followed him. They went out here and followed. He didn't even know where he was going in High Point. The highway patrol took him to where he was taking the moonshine. He might have helped him unload it. Nobody knows this, and I've not told but a handful of people. So world, whoever's listening right now, watching this right here, this is the honest to God's truth about this. But my grandpa was one of the greatest cockfighters in the world at one time. He was the best. And I got to briefly spend very little time with him when I was a kid. I remember one story, he went to Kentucky up there to fight roosters, and him and his partner won $100,000. And they said he was drunk off of White Lightning before they got to the Blue Ridge Parkway, or the Blue Ridge, where he come back down from Kentucky. He was tore up, like, I guess passed out or whatever. But I guess if you had $50,000 cash in your pocket, you know. He was quite a man. He was a moonshiner, like 50 to 80 cases a week, 50 times $60 a week for 30 years. My daddy and my uncle, Grayson, that's who I was named after. He got killed in Korea, machine gun fire. 17, 18 years old, Korea, dead. All right. Before he went, when he was 15 and my daddy was 14, my grandpa and my grandma went to town. Him and my uncle got up in the attic and got all their money down. Got all my grandpa's money down out of the attic, all of it. Poured it out on the bed, a queen. Poured it out. My daddy said that the money was that deep in every corner of that bed. That's how deep the money was. They hustled and bustled, put it all back, rolled it back up, put it back in the jars, half-gallon jars, how he kept it, put it back up in the attic. Grandpa and Grandma come home. Took a few days before he got back up there and said, I want to go look at all my money. Went up there and looked at all his money, and it was all wrong. If you spend time somewhere, you know when something's out of place. Now, this man would go daily because he was selling 50 to 80 cases a week, maybe 100, had 4 steals. He knew somebody messed with his money. And that's where my Uncle LP comes in. My Uncle LP, he was a shorter fellow. And my uncle, he's my grandma's brother. He told me a bunch of stuff. I didn't know whether to believe him or not, but he told me that my grandpa had $275,000 to $300 or more of cash from moonshining buried. And he told me that after that happened, after my daddy and my uncle went up in that attic and got that money, he figured it out, and he had a man build him a box for that money that was airtight, where no air get to it. Because if air gets to it in that jar, that money, it rots. Did you know that? I actually found a jar full of money in the basement. But I was digging the basement out when I lived up there 2 years. I looked all over for that money. And then Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton changed out all the old money. So you'd have had to spend it like very independently, or however conservatively. You'd have to like do it smartly, or they would find you. Because all them numbers aren't there. They're non-existent anymore, I guess, on the old money. Can you imagine running into somebody's got some old money just out flashing around? They'll find you, I'd say, because the numbers, they don't have numbers on them no more. And I looked for it, and then LP, he actually told me, which I'm not going to divulge to y'all, because I still may want to go back and look some more, but I do have one little nook of candy that he gave me to go look for that money sometime in that box. And if it's up in the woods where all the leaves and all, and the other little thing he told me about, if I could just find that one thing he told me about and find that money, then I'd give you some of it. My daddy was a bootlegger. Him and his buddy Glenn, they had a steal when they were 16. He was running moonshine for somebody else. He wasn't running it for my grandpa. Him and my grandpa didn't get along that good. But my daddy had wrecked. My daddy, by the time he left to go to California, had 28 cars total loss up in the cow pasture. And this all tie back in together. They couldn't catch my daddy. And my daddy never told me this story. My cousin told me this story. They could not catch my daddy. So it's just like the movies, you know what I'm saying? And I know my daddy, there was another old guy that told me here recently, he had the fastest Lincoln in the United States. It was a 1941 Lincoln, and it was the fastest car ever. And the way his friends tell it, my daddy never even mentioned it. I don't know if he didn't want me to know about it or he was just proud, but they couldn't catch him. So it's just like the movies. You know, them cops are chasing him and they're trying to and my daddy, when I was little, we was in a 77 Cadillac. I was 8 years old. We'd go up there where he lived at and he would cut his lights off in them curves. And he'd hit them curves in that big 77 Cadillac. We'd be doing 110. I mean, he was getting it up through every time we got on that road. Every time, didn't matter what was in a Volkswagen. We had a 72 Volkswagen van or whatever. It was wide open up that road. But they could not catch him. They could not catch him. They wrecked, ain't no telling how many cars or how much it cost, right? My grandpa owned all the law enforcement back then. He owned them all. Owned all the law enforcement. Highway patrol, judges, chiefs, captains. They was all on his payroll. They couldn't catch my daddy, and he was really young then. They couldn't catch him. He crashed a lot and didn't get caught when he got crashed. I don't know how them cars got back up in the pasture but he had a lot of DWIs. I don't know a whole lot about the DWI thing. He had a whole lot. He seemed like he had 10 to 15. Back when they were like just tickets. You know what I mean? It wasn't no big deal back in the 50s. I don't reckon. My daddy raced cars. He was one of the first race car drivers there ever was. He raced at Bowman Gray and several other tracks around. Wasn't very successful at it because he would wreck. He would like lap them. He'd tell me. I do remember my daddy saying this. He said in mine, he's driving that race car. You know when he got going around. He said, I think I'm gonna lap him one more time. And he'd just push down. He'd lap him one more time. He'd get up like 9 laps. He's 9 laps ahead of all these people, and then wreck. And anyway, but they finally caught my daddy. They finally caught him in Forsyth County, down below Winston somewhere, with a full load of moonshine. Knew who he was, pictures of the car, everything. I mean, they was gonna bury him. He was gonna go to prison for a long time. And my grandpa, from what I was told, got involved, and there wasn't much that he could do either at the time because they wanted him bad. We're talking about a lot of embarrassing and, you know what I'm saying? And hush, hush, and don't tell nobody. We wrecked the car last night, and we totally lost that car. We got to get a new car for that. And here you got this the sheriffs and stuff, and probably the revenuer was probably trying to catch him too. They was on him. But anyway, they caught him, and the story that I heard, either you leave for 10 years or you go to prison. And my dad left. He packed up, he left. He went to California, tried to do the whole movie thing, worked 3 jobs. He was a chef, short order cook, this, that, and other, whatever, jack of all trades, just like I am. And he went out there to California and lived out there, and he called my mama. I'll leave a few other little things out. 'Cause my daddy, he was, he loved women, but up until my mom. And then he called my mom, I think 1965, and asked her to marry him. And they got married. They got married in our town. He would sneak back because he told me he come back one time and those 28 cars had been scrapped, sold. And he was mad about that. But so I was born in 1969, the best year there ever was. Best year there ever was, Woodstock, and we went to the moon. So the best year there ever was. And maybe Evel Knievel jumped something that year too, because I loved Evel Knievel. So anyway, 1971, I was almost 2 years old. They come back home. He'd been gone a while. They wanted me and my sister to get into like film and movies and stuff, and we was just little, you know what I mean? And the reason they told me they come back was because their parents were getting old, and they wanted to help them. But none of that ever happened. So I don't know. I think it was I think it was time, because North Carolina used to have a statutes of limitation, a 10-year thing, statutes of limitation, but they don't have it no more. So you can't never do that again in North Carolina. If you commit a crime, that crime, it'll be there when you get back, from what I understand. So anyway, moonshine is in my family. My grandma My daddy's mom, she helped my grandpa. She run Blocker, I heard, you know, because my grandpa run it too. He'd load up a LTD in a heartbeat. But in the house that I moved into in 1995 with my mom and my dad was my grandpa's house. When you step down to go in the basement, he had a trap door that 200 cases would go in. He had 200 cases there. They'd come get them at the house too, you know. He had a trap up in the cock house where you trained the roosters to fight and all. And I found 9.5 gallons of rye like 14 years after he passed away. I found that 9.5 gallons of rye up there under the cock house, trap door right there where you work at, and you open it up. And I seen them lids. I thought I'd found that money, boy. I went in there and dug that whole thing out. There wasn't but there was 9.5 gallons of rye in there, you know. And I handed it out to people that was still around. And my family said, "Look what I found. I found some of Grandpa's rye. It's still good, you know, hard to drink, but it was good. Rye, moonshine." He probably could have put 200 cases under there. He had 4 stills, way on back, I'd say. And him and his brother in 1925, 24 or 25, him and his brother Porter, they got caught making it, selling it, whatever. And I think they both got 5 years in federal prison. And they went to West Virginia to do their time. Ramey was my grandpa and Porter. Okay, they kind of looked like. Grandpa Ramey was a little bit taller than Porter. It's kind of looked like his brothers. When they got out in 1 year. They did 1 year, from what I understand. They did 1 year. And when they got out, they both looked at each other, and Porter Vaughn said, "I'm going legit from here on out." And Ramey said, "I'm not. I'm going back to moonshining." So he went back to moonshining. They was going about it wrong. So he figured it all out. I mean, from what I've heard from his friends and people that knew him and people that, all of that, he started buying people. He started buying judges and sheriffs, and, you know, you don't want to believe that stuff goes on. But, and then another story come along to make me believe it. This man went up to my grandpa downtown in our little town and said, "This boy, his daddy died, and there's kids there in the house, and they ain't got no money, and they need to eat." And my grandpa was a good man. You could talk to a bunch of people still today, and they tell you he'd just give people money that was in need, you know, to help them out eat or whatever. He said, "I ain't got nothing right now, but give me your phone number." And I think that first week there, sometime in that first week, he called that man and said, "Tell that boy to call me." And he called him, and he said, "Be at my house tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock in the morning." So that boy showed up. And the LTD was already loaded with a full load of moonshine. He said, "You're gonna take it down to High Point, and when you get to High Point, you're gonna get pulled over by a highway patrol." And he said, "I'm gonna get pulled over by a highway patrol." He said, "Yep." He said, "And when he comes up to the door, just tell him you got a load of moonshine in the back of this car that's Ramey Vaughn's." And he said, "Okay, I'll do that." So he got there. He drove that LT down. It was low to the ground. It was, you know, full of moonshine. I don't know how much it would hold. Drove it on down, got right down to High Point, North Carolina, and the highway patrol pulled him over. He come up to the door and he said, "What you doing, sir?" And he said, "I got a whole load of moonshine that's Ramey Vaughn's in this car." 10-4, he said, "Follow me." He cut his blue lights on, went in front of the car. The LTD followed him. They went out here and followed. He didn't even know where he was going in High Point. The highway patrol took him to where he was taking the moonshine. He might have helped him unload it. Come back home, gave him some money. So that's how it worked back then, I guess.
Car fires make for great videos, but very bad days for car owners, and I protect my cars from fire by having an element extinguisher in every one of them for every mile. I actually got my first one from Freddie a few years ago as we were shooting Car Trek 1, where a fire was a very real risk, but it's always important to be protected. Element fire extinguishers weigh less than 1/10 of what a traditional fire extinguisher weighs, and they discharge 5 times longer. They also make no mess, and they never expire. So it's worth picking up a few to have around the garage, your house, and of course, in your car. They've got a special bundle offer right now during the month of May for our VINwiki viewers, but it's always a good time to buy a couple of these to keep you, your car, and your home safe. So check them out now at the link in the description below.